to Thrivecast. This is a show hosted by ThriveStack where we talk and learn from various SaaS leaders. There are some interesting stories to be had on these podcasts. Today we are exploring a wonderful playbook. This is Cloudinary, and we have Sanjay Sarthi, self-serve and developer experience VP. And this is one of the most successful developer growth stories in the recent SaaS industry. Sanjay, I think you've scaled and have been in the company for more than 10 plus years. You've scaled to 100 plus million ARR in less than 12 years. I think in 2021 you crossed that particular milestone. But Sanjay, if you could help understand a little bit about how did Cloudinary begin? Tell us a little bit about your background. There are some interesting anecdotes that you told me the first time we met a couple of weeks back. You have interesting and staggering 2,500 to 33,000 odd new registrations every day, and that's pretty much unheard of. You've also navigated the unique continuum, and where most companies struggle, you start off with the self-serve experience and then get to an enterprise or product-led sales. You guys have mastered it, so we're going to touch upon that a little bit. Sanjay, I was also very surprised to hear about the contrarian strategies that you guys employed. I have some VC friends. I was running, some of these conversations with them. You guys went, opposite to some of the VC conversations about hiring technical support leads or customer success leads as the first set of employees, which was unheard of at that time. You started building and re-architecting documentation, that's consumable by AI tools. So now when you search from Perplexity and ChatGPT, Cloudinary comes, up and center. So that's incredible. So we're going to hear more about these particular stories. So Sanjay, before we begin, welcome to the podcast, and I'm happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gururaj. Really excited to share the Cloudinary story and what we've learned along the way.
So Sanjay, thank you so much for taking the time. So let's get started with your background a little bit. Typically we, start off with the background and how did you get into this particular business? Why did you look at Cloudinary? And I know you probably were one of the early employees with Cloudinary. So maybe tell us a little about yourself and the company to begin at the outset.
Sure. So my background has primarily been on the marketing side of businesses, software businesses. I've been in the software industry 20 plus years and started off when application servers were all the rage and moved into a variety of different roles, product marketing, market development. But in a lot of the companies I worked with, the developer was oftentimes the center of the user community. And so I've always had an appreciation for companies that view developers as critically important to their success. And I had actually a close friend who was working at Cloudinary, who is, in a moment of coincidence, the founder of the first ever technology company I worked at. And so he reached out to me and pitched me on Cloudinary, and I had a conversation with Itai, the CEO, and a number of others. And that's how I learned about and ultimately joined Cloudinary. And my first half of my tenure at Cloudinary, I ran marketing, so built a marketing organization. And this last few years, what I've been doing is essentially a dual hat job. One part of the hat is the caring and feeding of our developer community, which is our most important user community. And that comprises of technical teams like developer relations, documentation, working on our front-end SDKs. And then the other side of my brain is focused around our self-service business, which makes up 25 to 30% of our revenue. It's growing rapidly. And those two come together nicely because developers are not just users of our product, but oftentimes influence the purchase of Cloudinary and are a hugely important part. So that business and sort of technical sides of the house come together nicely in my current job.
No, that's wonderful. We've had a podcast, I think almost about 6 months back. I think 3 of them, back to back on product-led marketing. And, the misnomer, at that time was, if you put up a website with a sign up button, people will discover you and click on sign up. But that's so untrue. And I think what you're mentioning here is the amalgamation of the product-led marketing, the self-serve business, and the all the essentials like the documentation and the marketing that goes alongside with it. So that's wonderful. Before we jump in, to various things that we want to talk about, could you maybe interest our audience a little bit about what is Cloudinary, what do they do, and essentially your beginning story, from the way that you incepted. I know you mentioned that even before Cloudinary became a product, you were a consulting company. So maybe if you could start from there, and I think our audience would definitely love that story. That's also very unusual.
Sure. So Cloudinary is a SaaS-based image and video platform. So what we do is enable companies to really take advantage of their media assets, images, videos, etc., and really enable them to create amazing visual experiences from them. And so what you can do is essentially, as a customer or user of Cloudinary, is upload these images and videos, manage them, transform them into a wide variety using crops and filters and different sort of effects, and then deliver them across a wide variety of channels, whether it's your web or your mobile device. And all of this can be done on the fly. And so what we like to say is what we do for our developer audience is automate a huge amount of this at scale. And when I talk about scale, we, as you outlined at the beginning of the conversation, at the beginning of January, when we're chatting here, we're north of 3,000 registrations a day. We've reached over 3 million developers who we've engaged with. We have over 11,000 paying customers. So there's a lot of what I would call both self-service and enterprise adoption of these products. And everybody likes engaging with visual content, right? Nobody just engages with text content. So from a backstory perspective, the three founders of Cloudinary are developers. They were developers and they had their own consulting firm. And they help companies build applications of all types.
Mm-hmm.
But what they noticed, and this is, I think, true for a lot of how companies get founded, is they recognize patterns. And one of the patterns they recognized was we are constantly and manually editing images and videos to build into these applications that we're creating on behalf of our clients. And they ask themselves, and we even still have this email from one of the founders that we use both internally and externally, where he says, I have an idea. Can we automate this process and save our developers and ourselves a ton of time by creating a service to do a lot of the things we've been doing manually? And they thought about it. And I think one of the advantages of having a consulting company is they had a built-in group of clients that they could pitch this to, this nascent service. So that's how the origin story of Cloudinary began. It was a way to solve a problem, a pain point that they had. And they wanted to solve it from the perspective of themselves as developers so that they could be better served to help their clients, and they thought many other developers would find it useful as well.
I think those are the amazing stories. When you become the first dog food customer of yourself, and you realize the value immediately. This can translate to hundreds and thousands of hours across your customer bases as well. So I think this is a wonderful story of consulting companies pivoting over a period of time to become a fully functional product company. So do you still have the consulting business, or is that now?
No, that disappeared very quickly once, or I shouldn't say disappeared, but we've pivoted very quickly to being a pure play product SaaS business as we got traction in the marketplace and as many developers and companies found us organically beyond just the initial set of clients that we got through the consulting route.
Got it. So, I think this story is contrarian number one, and we'll probably touch upon that a little bit. So I'll keep counting, right? So this one is where you started really from a consulting background, to become a product pivot, right? So that's, that's contrarian number one. I want to touch upon the second part. I know you mentioned about there are three founders. One of them was customer success or support. That's contrarian number two. Could you tell us a little backstory about how that came into being, where your first hire or first set of maybe the first five engineers that typically come in are usually not support. So how did that come along?
Sure. So the founders knew they wanted to build what they called a B2D service, business to developer service, where, and the premise was very much around self-service, making developers successful. The term PLG wasn't invented back then. They didn't use that. But the idea was, how do we make developers trust Cloudinary? How do we create developer trust through the products and capabilities we offered? And I think the recognition, and the very powerful recognition by the three founders, was the idea that while we want to create amazing products and amazing documentation, to make developers successful when you have a new product, or in some ways a new category, you need to provide some level of tech support to make them successful, because there are no patterns that exist out there. Everybody's been doing this by hand. So you want to provide a mechanism to make that initial set of developers and everybody after that very successful. So the second person we hired after the three founders is the person that is now actually the VP of all our customer service or customer support organization. And there were two, I think, key components to that. One is who we hired and who we continue to hire in these roles are developers themselves. They're very technical. And for us, it's not just about answering tickets and reducing the number of tickets that are in the flow. It's about, what are the outcomes? Did we make those developers successful? And if we made those developers successful, word of mouth accelerated, because that's what we use, the word of mouth success, to drive additional adoption of Cloudinary. So it was a contrary bet. We didn't invest in go-to-market. We didn't invest in sales. We invested in the things we thought would make developers successful. And that's, I think, a contrary but successful bet that's paid off.
Yeah, I think you're taking care of the users, and that should become a flywheel by itself. Maybe tell us the backstory about well, you're building the tool sets internally for yourself. How did you get the first 10 or 20 or 30 odd customers? Because that takes a different effort by the founding team, who, as you rightly mentioned, were developers at that time. So how did the first 10 or 15 customers came into being? Do you have any insights onto how did they became a founder or a salesman of some sort, right? To go away from the developers.
So I think there were maybe 2 or 3 paths that I can sort of highlight. We discussed a little bit about the fact that they had the consulting business that they could use to.
They had some of the jobs there.
Some of the early customers and early feedback was able to be obtained through that route. I think beyond just at a product level, one of the things that we said is, hey, how do we create a URL-based API so that it's very easy to manipulate these images and videos and other assets on the fly through the URL? And then that translated into, we're working with the developer community, developers work with SDKs. What are the set of SDKs that we can offer in conjunction with this core API that allow developers to very quickly, hey, we introduced, for example, one of the first ones was a Ruby gem. So for Ruby on Rails developers back in the day, how do we make it very easy to incorporate Cloudinary into your workflows? So that's the second. The third, which again, related to this word of mouth concept beyond just technical support, was a real focus around technical content and documentation.
Mhm.
And the idea was we did it in addition to supporting developers with this new product and this new sort of way of working. We found that it generated an enormous amount of SEO juice at the time. And
Mhm.
so and the other bet that we made is it's not just important to talk about the what, here's what the product does, and here are the methods and the parameters, etc., but the how, right? So you provide tutorials around use cases we thought would be relevant, and we put that both into the context of the blog, into our blog, into our documentation, other sources that could be consumed by developers. And so immediately, we generated quite a bit of SEO juice around those content elements, and that drove visibility for developers who are searching for these topics. And we could see the search terms starting to to grow as well.
Mhm.
So I think those three essentially motions were drivers for how we attained the first 20, 30, 50 customers, very much in a self-service mode. There weren't salespeople there pounding the pavement at that point.
So let me go little deeper into this one. So you build the content, so the SEO and the Google searches, and maybe there was no Bing at that time. Started rating, your domain, and started suggesting those answers. Developers would click on them, and they would come to your website at that time.
Correct.
Did they come to the website at that time, or the blogs, or did they go directly into the product? No, sorry, I'm a little. I think I missed one of the portion that you earlier
Yeah,
mentioned.
they wouldn't go directly into the product. They would go directly to the content piece that supported that search term.
Okay.
But what we focused on was to be able to say this coming to our blog or to our documentation or whatever the tutorial or the recipe was enough of an inducement to then click on the register now button and start
Mhm.
trying the product. So that's what we found to be certainly initial drivers, and the fact that you could initially try it for free. The other bet we made is we said we didn't want to do a free trial. We wanted to do a freemium product. So we offered a free version from the get-go for a certain capacity. Here's what you get, and try it out to your heart's content. And then as you grow and as your consumption needs and product needs evolve and mature, then we have paid plans for you.
Well, I think you provided the value with free. I think developers love free, so they may not have the propensity to go and pay for it. Maybe that's a wise choice. And by the way, a good friend of mine, he wrote a book on freemium, which is just behind me. And he's been interviewing. I'll probably suggest to have you guys talk to him as well. Dave Boyce, he's from Winning by Design.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, yeah. So Sanjay, maybe tell us a little more. So were your registrations, were you able to go measure at that time, where these developers are coming to your website? Very likely, some of your vanity metrics like the traffic on the website started to shoot up, your search score, search domain rating started to shoot up. But how did that translate into someone actually coming and clicking on the sign up? Is it just the free portions of it, or were there something else? Any of the tactics that you used to get them to sign up? What was the inducement? What was the bait, that you got him at that time to allow them to sign up?
Yeah, so I think and it's been a long-standing belief of ours, Gururaj, that the best way to create value for our users is to show that value as it progresses, and to create trust that the product does what it says it does, solves customers' problems the way we say it does. Because if we do that, and if we showcase specific value, and a value could be around, let's give a simple example, around optimization. That is, we can tell you that as a result of using Cloudinary and the automated way of being able to sort of identify the best format to use for your images and videos without any loss in discernible quality, is probably worth X amount in savings and bandwidth. And once we could show that, this is, we would provide examples and tooling and things like that, that they could see themselves, even with the free product, then it became very easy for them to go, oh, wow, I can see the business value, even if I'm just an individual developer. And it makes sense for me to apply this if I'm in a company within my company. And I think we were helped by the tailwind that everybody was moving into a model where visual experiences, whether it was e-commerce, media and entertainment, travel and hospitality, where the differentiator was how much engagement you received as from your end users. And the faster we could do that on behalf of our customers and developers, the better off we were and the better off they were, right? So it worked out where there was value creation, both first and foremost for them. And once they saw that value creation, we were able to generate revenues from that value creation.
That's an interesting story. So these developers, they would, they would go sign up, they would open up their pockets and start paying. So when did you start moving at an account level? Because now I think you have almost, and I think you did a wonderful, you went to the details about this whole continuum that you built from self-serve to enterprise. And before we get into that, at what juncture did you go from the individual developers who were signing up to the product to the account or the companies that they're working with? And how did you go about, figuring out that, hey, these developers work at these companies, and there are many of them working from the same companies, let's go pitch to them to say, hey, go buy, some kind of a team plan or something of that sort.
Yeah, it was a few years later, right? So if we think about 2015, 2016 was when we first started to think about sort of a quote unquote enterprise sales, account executives to sell to clients. And candidly, oftentimes what would happen is we would get inbound inquiries that said, your plans aren't big enough for us. We have more assets than what you show on your website. So there are two ways you could go down that path. One is you could continue to create more and more tiers, but that gets too complex, as you well know. You don't want to give 55 choices to somebody on a website.
Yeah.
But the other way was to say, hey, what really are these people who are lobbing calls into us? What do they really need and want? And that's what prompted us to start looking into how do we scale the business beyond just pure self-service into more of an enterprise motion. And to the term, you and I have chatted about this continuum, this idea that the continuum exists because the business needs for an enterprise may be more complex and more sophisticated, but the business value has to still be there, right? And so our ability to show that business value to a small 10-person organization all the way up to an Adidas is true today, right? And it was true back in something that we could show in 2015. So that's sort of the thinking that went behind it. And the idea is that even today we'll have self-service customers, both they'll proactively reach out to us, or we'll see some signals where we reach out to them just to find out if we can continue to create value for them. And sometimes it's just a better fit for them to be on an enterprise plan. Sometimes it's a better fit for them to be on a self-service plan. We don't want to force people to go into one direction or the other. We just think there's, as we said, this continuum of value, and depending on what's most important to you, we'll share with you what we think is best.
So let me get that right. So your company was established in 2012, and if I understand correctly, for the first 3-4 years or so, you had no sales guys. Everything was completely self-servable. Developers would come, pay on smaller individual level plans, and then you start getting inbound requests to, upgrade the plans to more developers, more assets, or whatever the limit was. So my question to you is, when did you first hire a salesperson? Very likely when the inbound started coming in from larger accounts. Could you maybe share a little bit of thoughts on why did you decide to go hire a salesperson? How did you go about doing it? And where the salesperson only looking at the inbound request, or they started looking at doing some more outbound themselves as well?
Yeah, so I think the timing was around 2015, when we started to really push this. Actually, our CEO moved to the US and established the US office. The three founders were in Israel at the time. And so when it was after that move into really the US, when we started establishing the start of a go-to-market team, if you will, that included account executives. From our belief, longstanding belief, is that we could have both a self-service and enterprise motion, and that's true today. As I mentioned, 70% of our revenues are enterprise today, and 30% are self-service. So we've done the combo route, and we believe strongly that both motions are possible. And we went to it starting with self-service and moving to enterprise. That just happens to be how we worked it. And we also think strongly that there are things we learn about these motions that can help the other, right? We understand, for example, we can share with the enterprise team, and we do this regularly, hey, what types of companies are coming to us in self-service land? What are the vertical markets? Because those are some early market signals, oftentimes, that we can share with the enterprise team to maybe give them a sense of what might happen in the next 6 months, 9 months, a year, based on what we're seeing in self-service land. And sometimes they'll come to us and go, hey, we're seeing this enormous, these 2 or 3 use cases that are cropping up in enterprise land. Do you think those might be interesting in self-service? And we'll go off and maybe see if we can highlight those in our developer newsletters and things like that. So it goes both ways, but that's hopefully gives you your viewership and readership an understanding of how we've balanced the two.
So that answers the inbound kind of a question a lot more. When did you first have the outbound? Or when did you build a new capacity to do outbound?
I would say in 2016 as well. So we started adding sales development reps. We started adding basically solutions engineers to help with outbound related engagement. So it was in that same time frame where we had enough data to tell us the types of companies we wanted to target and go after, and we started building tooling that would allow us to showcase the value of some of our capabilities that the account execs and sales engineers could use as part of their outbound pitches. So I would say it's certainly the inbound never stopped, and the outbound really kicked off, late 2015, 2016, and then really we started accelerating in 2017 and beyond.
Yeah, here's an interesting question, and I know we've not scripted that before, not touched upon it, but, did you guys figure out whether the ICP for these enterprise accounts or larger accounts, were they very different than the ones which were coming in from self-serve? Tell us a little about the whole continuum. Maybe it's a 2-part question, the continuum portions of it, how many of the self-serve accounts essentially over time, you do an enterprise, kind of a deal, maybe 2 years, 3 years later, I'm guessing. But the second portion of the question is, how did you compensate, the sales team on these accounts, which really came in from self-serve? Would they get compensated on upsell? What was the commission basis that you guys figured out, because these guys were already new accounts, paying accounts in the system. Very likely the sales team were brought in to do the upsell, the cross-sell. Tell us about that whole story of the continuum, if you will.
Sure. So to answer the first part of the question, in in terms of the ICP and the users. As we started, even in the self-service SMB business, oftentimes we went from individual developers. Oftentimes we work with CTOs, right, who are saying, hey, we're trying to define a quick architecture for our new product, our new capabilities, even in self-service land. As we moved into sort of the enterprise world, we were still on the technical side of the house. So we still had enormous success in, let's say, engineering teams. They would partner with the business teams. I'll give you an example. So we would, if you're an e-commerce company, which is one of our sweet spots, oftentimes the engineering team is getting requests from the business line of business owners, right, for particular products or areas to say, we want to do XYZ with our e-commerce offerings. And so the VP of engineering, the directors, et cetera, would be essentially the people driving the choice of a Cloudinary to support the business needs from, let's say, an e-commerce leader, a product e-commerce manager, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
As we evolved, one of the things we started to get pulled more and more into the business folks, because they wanted to understand the business impact of product choices like Cloudinary. And so we, over time, we have evolved our ICPs to include more and more business users as we've expanded our product portfolio from just the technical side of the house to include also marketing folks and people that have a keen interest in images and videos, whether they're part of the actual business unit or they own the website or other areas. So I would say it's been the last 5, 6 years that the business side of the house has become a bigger part of our audience, but mainly on the digital asset management side, mainly on the people influencing why a tool like Cloudinary is important. But we've also realized it's important to bring that business side of the house, especially at the VP level and above, to get buy-in for the choice of a product like ours.
Yeah, I think that's probably why you started scaling much better.
Right.
In my conversations with many SaaS founders out there, they get stuck saying that, hey, we have a healthy self-serve pipeline. Let's go only double down on that. But you guys scaled on both sides of the equation, the enterprise equation, where you started to having buying committees and having business buyers alongside with the actual users who might be the developers. But you started pitching that. So I think that's probably led, so I think on a contrarian standpoint, you guys accelerated to both have this continuum, both the self-serve and the enterprise continuum, much faster than most of the companies at that time. So, I think compliment on that part.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and I think it was a recognition by the team to understand that it's perfectly valid to have a core user group audience, right? In developers, that's our bread and butter, and that's our value add. And then understanding the broader business audience that understands the business value that we can bring and says, yes, we need a solution like Cloudinary, and we understand the business value. And if we can do both of those pretty well, then we can, that makes for a great flywheel.
Yeah, so I think, thanks for sharing all of the happy stories. I want to go and dig a little deeper onto some of the failure stories.
Sure.
We might call them as mistakes or learnings that we learn along the way. I know as part of your job, Sanjay, you also run experiments, data experiments to figure out something is working, something's not working. You also touch upon activation, user journeys, whether you can add friction, reduce friction, a whole bunch of those things. Could you maybe share some key experiments that failed and, that you can proudly call them that it was healthy to fail them early now, on hindsight, than at that time when you were going through this. So tell me maybe 1 or 2 experiments and share that to some of our audience. And I think our audience would love these failure stories quite a bit as well.
Sure. So I think I can think of one that was quote unquote a failure, but I think also helped us, and actually it led to a structural change in how we think about new product introductions. And so that's the area that I'll focus on. We've always believed that successful SaaS businesses that have long-term value are multi-product businesses. There are very few multi-billion-dollar SaaS businesses that just have one product. And so we've always, when we launched in 2011, 2012, it was with our image product. Then we added video as a standalone product. We added digital asset management. But I want to talk about an introduction of a product that actually didn't work, and talk about some of the lessons we learned. And so the hypothesis that we went into the product development cycle with was this idea that optimization as a use case was important enough and wide enough that we could make it a standalone product to solve that one particular use case. And that we felt like there was enough business interest just in that people would pay for that, and then they would pay for other things if they needed it. So we did validation. We thought through all the different product areas that we thought developers would want. And then we rolled it out. And we rolled it out using all the muscle behind our go-to-market engines that we had. And frankly, what happened wasn't so much that there wasn't a need for it. There was a need for it. And that's what we had thought about. But what we had not thought about completely during that experimentation phase is what happens at scale if all of a sudden your core product might get cannibalized. And we didn't really do that in the experimentation when we were thinking through the product, because all we were focused on was, does this product work for the group of people that have expressed interest in it, not necessarily for the people that haven't expressed interest in it. So once we saw that, in fact, it wasn't just net positive, there were negatives associated with it, we realized, hey, the lesson we're learning isn't so much the innovation or launching new products. It was, we maybe need to do more of a job understanding how to innovate yet manage rollouts better than we do today. So what we've done, the change we made as a result of this mistake, and we stopped selling the product, it's deprecated now. But what we've done is essentially have a product portfolio that's divided into two parts. One part is sort of our scale product portfolio that I've alluded to, that we have account execs, self-service, solutions engineers, architects, tons of marketing, partnerships, all going after that because established, well-known, all about scale. Then what we've built is almost like startup incubators for products that we think have incredible potential, but we don't want to necessarily take resources away from the scale area. So what we've done is given the startup, each of these product areas, a small team to go out and experiment and understand ICPs and understand minimal product market fit and all the other things, build in public, etc., and figure out, do these products have an opportunity to scale? And our expectation is not everything coming out of that invest group, these startup incubators will. It's okay. It's okay if a bunch of them don't work. And I think that mindset shift from saying, oh, everything has to work, to let's move really quickly around a set of interesting product ideas and say no if we don't think they'll achieve scale product market fit. And I think that's one of the big lessons we've learned out of mistakes. And we've actually not, even in this new model, we've said, hey, yeah, this is interesting, but not interesting enough to move into a scale model. So we'll just stop the experimentation and the development around And giving ourselves the freedom to fail like that at a product level, I think was
That's incredible.
yeah.
That's incredible. So Sanjay, maybe if you're able to share, what's the name of the product and how was it competing with the core? I think my subsequent question was, were you building a product that could have been sold as an add-on, or how was it competing with your
Yeah,
main?
it was sold. The product was called Media Optimizer, Cloudinary Media Optimizer.
Okay.
We basically sold it as a standalone product, not as an add-on. We sold it as a standalone product, very specifically, as the name would indicate, if you wanted to optimize your media. And the setup was simple. Everything was simple. And what happened is our core image product
Mm-hmm.
saw sales sort of stop,
Oh,
not sales cycles lengthened and in some cases stalled because people said, wait, why do I need this if I can get this and
got it. Yeah.
not get the full, and how do I think? So it wasn't net additive, right, is the
Got
way
it.
to think about it.
Correct.
And unless you feel like somebody else is going to come in and um, take away that business anyway, then basically cannibalizing ourselves for without any external pressure is usually not a good best practice. So I think that was the lesson we learned. So and the name.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That definitely makes sense. So, any other experiments? I know you guys have, experimented a lot with pricing. I was looking up on the, some of the page history of your pricing pages, and interesting note to the audiences, Cloudberry had more than 300 to 400 odd pricing changes. At least the page has been changed. I'm not sure exactly if the pricing has changed or not. Even in the last 6 to 7 years, that's the number of changes that you've done to
Yeah,
those
we're
pages.
constantly experimenting. Actually, I want to give you a different example, but just equally relevant, which is related to our registration page. So if I can share my screen,
Please do.
I'll highlight that. So let me just share my screen. So this on what you see here back in the summer of 2022 was our old sign up page. And we asked for a lot of different things, even if some things were optional. We asked you for your name, your email, password, country, blah, 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 blah. And our hypothesis at the time, and when I was looking at this again, going, do we know how many people? I think we have a lot of drop off. I said, I think people come to our sign up page and go, this is too much, and I'm not going to fill in everything. And so we said, well, we've got to experiment. We've got to test this. And so I won't go through every single experiment, but I will share with you and your readers, your viewers, what currently exists, right? This is the page that's currently, as you can tell from the URL, what currently exists. And so the product team, us, we had designers, the UX, UI team, we went through and identified a series of best practices in that summer of 2022 and said, let's keep this very simple, right? How do developers sign up today? Yeah, maybe they'll give us their email address. 90% of the people we interact with have a GitHub account. Even probably the same percentage have a Google account, right? So let them tell us what they prefer. And so it's very simple. You can see, when you sign up, it's just 3 lines, boom, you create your account, or you can go to GitHub and just authorize whatever account you have, right? Very straightforward. What we noticed, Gururaj, when we rolled this out, so we first took it to 10% of our registration, then 25%, then 50. We took our time to make sure we didn't lose at that point. I don't know, what was it, 1,500 registrations a day, whatever it was. We didn't want to impact it. So as we rolled it out, we said, okay, we're not impacting the actual registration number. After it rolled out, when we compared the before and after, basically the successful registration completion rates went up 9 percentage points. 9 percentage points in using our numbers was equivalent to a 37% rise.
Wow.
37% from, and there was, shame on me for not, pushing this even earlier, right? Because we sort of recognized this. We said, yeah, this is a little long, and we had received complaints. But again, back to the point you made, we make changes. This is what it was today. The left-hand side is the same. We've played around with the right-hand side a lot. But the core, how do we reduce friction for developers can be even true on something as simple as a sign-up form. And all we need to do, the reason we ask for email is so we can validate that you're real, not a bot, and all that fun stuff. So those are some of the things that we've done, and we're constantly doing, right? We have a whole weekly or bi-weekly meeting where we go through all the experiments from product team to revenue teams to understand what we're driving in self-service and the developer experience. And as we talk about, it's okay to fail, right? The failure or an experiment not working is still successful because it's told us something. It's told us that particular hypothesis isn't right, isn't valid.
Yeah, so I think that's a beautiful rendition of the experiment. Just having if you know that your developers have a GitHub account, making it easy, adding Google, adding a simplistic, and I saw many things that you're doing right. Social proof, had logos there, showing the number of 3+ million developers there. So I think all of that gives a lot more credence, to that story itself. But I know, Sanjay, talking to you, you've done many experiments like these before, and maybe, in the interest of time, we'll probably add that to the show notes. To the live audience, Sanjay and your team have experimented on activation flows, showcasing, exclusive content. Do you want to take maybe a minute or so to show one or two examples and maybe talk through that?
Yeah, so I think one of the things we've done is highlight, trying to be more prescriptive for our developers based on what they care about doing and what they're doing. So for example, when you register for our product, oftentimes we'll be prescriptive about here's how you set everything up. And here are the SDKs you can use. Here is a way to get to your first aha moment using the SDK of your choice. And we've seen, again, running experiments, even in documentation, that the use of those quick start guides, the use of in-console flows raises activation rate. Even if you talk about 0.1%, 0.2%, at the scales we now operate at, all of a sudden that's meaningful because we can translate an increase in activation rate to an increase in usage. And for us, even if an increase in usage doesn't lead to immediate revenue because you're an individual developer, you're learning, what have you, what it does lead to, because we've made you successful, is a word of mouth recommendation. And that's still word of mouth today, even at the scale we operate at, Gururaj, is still 15 to 20% of our registrations.
Oh, wow.
So if you take a fifth of 3,000, right, that's 600 people every day that register from Cloudinary because they heard about it from a friend or a peer, right? And we're never going to have the marketing dollars to go after 180 countries around the world to really target relevant developer populations there proactively. So word of mouth becomes our way of reaching a global audience very quickly. And when you say 600 people a day come to Cloudinary because they trust their peers that Cloudinary can work for them, that's a powerful message.
These are incredible stories. I think accelerating your time to value. I think you guys have done wonderful jobs in shrinking the activation or the aha moment time, experimenting with it. It's wonderful. I think we've had an activation conversation with Andrew Kaplan about maybe 3 or 4 months back, and we focused purely on activation. And to all the listeners, I'm going to tie this together. So Cloudinary's activation rates, if they were able to shrink, and I don't know the exact numbers, maybe Sanjay, you could maybe tell us a little about it. If you shrink by 15-20%, your word of mouth probably goes up much more higher. Probably that's what you saw as part of the experiment. But even then, you may not necessarily benefit from the conversion rates, but it will shrink the conversion time, right? Right. So I think those are wonderful experiments, and I think we'll probably again touch back sometime later. But this is a wonderful story from Sanjay. Sanjay, you and your team, compliments to all of you, all the way from the engineering team to the marketing team to your sales and development team to bring all of that together. Any last word or any word of advice to many founders who may not necessarily have matured into the journey that you have gotten to, but they might be still slightly early days. Maybe they might have reached 500,000 or 1 million of revenue, and they're listening to this particular podcast. Do you want to have maybe 1 or 2 tidbits to them on how should they think about this?
I think what we've learned, and maybe what will be useful for founders, no matter what the product is or who your ICP or audience is create trust for that audience. And in our case, it's developer trust because that's our primary user audience. But in your case, it might be somebody else. It could be DevOps. It could be marketing. The faster you create the trust factor that your product, your service, your team is going to make that ICP successful, I think the faster your product gets adopted and the faster your product gets recommended. And so creating that trust factor is a huge part, in my mind, of how a lot of companies that do succeed have succeeded.
Super. I think with that note, I will probably end. So Sanjay, you did mention about making trust as a competitive advantage, for your company, and you guys have done that well. You also share a lot of things about how improving activation, can help you conversion. Experiments that you did with the sign up pages, the registration pages, leading to more signups and more trustworthy signups out there. So again, thank you for your time. We will, we'll wrap it up right now, but we will go summarize on all of this. And to all the listeners, if you're still watching us, we'll actually upload all of this to Spotify, YouTube, and all of that with the show notes. And you'll have Sanjay's LinkedIn and the company's name as part of that. Sanjay, again, thank you for taking the time. It was wonderful hosting you today.
Thank you so much for having me, Guru Raj.